This is Spirit Gym. Today's guest is Dr. Jacob Israel Liberman. Dr. Lieberman's discoveries in the fields of light, vision, and consciousness have been enthusiastically endorsed by luminaries in the fields of health, science, and spirituality, from Deepak Chopra and Bruce Lipton to Eckhart Tolle. His newest book, Luminous Life: How the Science of Light Unlocks the Art of Living, reveals how light guides our every step so we may fulfill our reason for being. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which would not be possible without you, our subscribers, and also our premier sponsors, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, Organifi, and Bioptimizers. The sponsors' special offers and discounts are mentioned throughout this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. In today's episode, Paul and Jacob are talking about vision and holism.
Well, as you've heard from Penny, we're interviewing Dr. Lieberman today, and I'm sure we'll have a beautiful dialogue as well as an interview. His approach to optometry is unique, holistic, and unlike any other optometrist or vision expert I've studied, Dr. Lieberman's view touches the spiritual dimensions of life. Dr. Lieberman is a PhD in vision science and was awarded an honorary doctorate of science from the Open International University for Complementary Medicines. Just the title of that university is exciting to me. So, Dr. Lieberman, it's a great joy to have you here. I've read a couple of your books. I wish I had time to get through all of them because they are excellent, and I will work my way through them as time permits. But I couldn't resist the opportunity to get you on the podcast. In fact, I probably emailed you a year or more ago. I don't know if it was you or someone wrote me back and said you were busy writing a book at the time. And then when I heard you on Kyle's podcast, I said to Kyle, hey, I got to get him on my podcast. So he reconnected me, and here we are. So what a great pleasure to have you. And thank you for all the great work you are doing and have done in the world. I got to say aho to that.
Thank you. It's always wonderful to connect with a brother,
Thank you.
and especially when we look alike.
We both use the
And
same barber.
yes, the barber without a shaver, and it's just great to be here with you. A very dear friend of mine who passed away years ago used to say, "The air is rather thin up here." And what she was referring to is that it isn't every day that you connect with someone who, in their own way, has come to a certain level of realization.
Right.
And let me just say, it's nice to be home at last.
Thank you. Well,
And
let's
thank
bring
you so
everybody
much
else.
thank you so much for inviting me. And we'll see what the animating force of this universe wants to deliver today.
Yeah. Well, the combination of the two of us should make something magical.
I hope so.
I trust. So, one of the most fascinating aspects of your personal story is how you restored your own vision and were able to stop using glasses. Can you share that story and why you think it's important for others to understand that it is possible to free ourselves from glasses and contact lenses?
So let me see if I can begin from the statement, you restored your own vision.
Sure.
That leaves us with the impression that we did something.
Right.
And my direct experience throughout my life is that what often occurs and almost always occurs when we're not looking, almost as a surprise, um, is what had occurred for me. And I had been doing a variety of things, and they all seemed to help a little bit. but it was as if I was trying to get to the goal line, and every attempt cut the distance in half. So it gave me the impression that I was almost there, but I wasn't actually getting there.
Mm.
And I think this is really important because my life experience keeps confirming to me that it's less about our doing and perhaps more about something that maybe it's related to the expression, the truth shall set you free.
Mm.
I always say awareness is curative,
Yes.
that merely becoming aware of something can often impact everything. And in fact, I think what we call spontaneous remission is the direct result of that process. So let me see if I can just share what occurred.
Sure.
Um, I was introduced to the practice of meditation in 1971, and and so I used to meditate every day, and I learned a great deal through the process of sitting and meditating, which initially I was led to believe was about quieting the mind and all these different things. And what I realized is that the mind would quiet temporarily, but then it would come back full gangbusters for the rest of the time. And so, what I learned from the process of meditating, that it wasn't so much about quieting the mind as it was about realizing that we were not the mind,
Mm. Beautiful.
that whatever we are is perhaps a field of awareness that is aware of the mind's chatter along with everything else. That which is external, all the somatic information that we're receiving uh, continually. And so I had been doing this for years. And one Sunday, I went into my room. I sat on the chair where I would typically meditate. I removed my glasses, which at the time I would wear often. And when I took them off, I remember everything was hazy. And then I closed my eyes, and within some period of time, I disappeared.
Beautiful.
I I
Thanks for
can't
coming back.
thank you. I can't tell you exactly what occurred, but there was then an awareness of everything in the room, including me. And the awareness was crystal clear. Everything was clear, including the empty space between whatever was observing and what was being observed. And when I say the empty space, it seemed like a field of sparkles that was just moving. And another thing that was obvious was that whatever was observing this seemed to be observing it from every angle
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously.
Yes.
I remained in this state until my eyes on their own opened. And the first awareness was that now I was looking at the bed, at the wall, at the artwork, and everything was crystal clear as it was when my eyes were closed. And it was like shocking because I had no idea what occurred. It was supposed to be impossible by everything that I had learned. And yet it was here in front of my eyes. And after about, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes of total amazement, then it went from amazement to terror
I got to hear this.
because when something like that occurs, especially if you're trained in the vision care field, who knows? Do you have a brain tumor? What's happened to your blood sugar level? I mean, there's so many things that started streaming in. And so I was with that feeling for a few minutes. And then I wanted to see, am I actually seeing as clearly as it appears to me? And so I took my glasses because my license said I needed them to drive. I got in my car, but everything was so clear that I forgot to put them on. I laid them on the seat next to me and I started driving to my office, which was 25 minutes away. And I noticed that everything was crystal clear. The license plates on the car, the street signs, whatever I was seeing was like almost shimmering in clarity. It was at one level in the room, but when I got out in the light, whoa, it was just like I had a smile on my face that I couldn't seem to stop. I got to my office and I rushed to get inside because I really wanted to see what occurred. And so at the time, I had been doing some research for American Optical Corporation, and I had just received an automated new level, um, what do you call it? A device that projected the letters for you.
Right.
But it wasn't a manual one, it was an automated one that had hundreds of eye charts on it,
Mm-hmm.
most of which I had never seen before. And so I started just putting up different eye charts, and I kept being able to see like a line below what appeared to be the 2020 line. And each time it was like, huh? That's impossible. Because prior to that, when I removed my glasses, I could see the big E, maybe one of the letters beneath that, but that was about it. And each time it was so shocking to me that I would take the manual that came with this automated projector and I would find that eye chart to make sure that I was seeing what I thought I was seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wasn't missing a letter. And I did that with about 10 different eye charts that I had never seen before. And I was seeing 300% better.
That's amazing.
And I said, What's happening here? So I then did something I'd never done before. I took the instrument, which is called a phoropter. I put a bunch of blurry lenses in it, the way eye doctors often begin their vision exam. I put it in front of my face, and then I slowly started to change the lenses, even though I couldn't see what I was doing, but I knew where the knob was to change them. And I took myself through the experience of a vision exam as if I would be doing it to a patient, even though I wasn't asking myself which is better, one or two. That was what I was essentially doing. And I did that for the right eye, and then I did that for the left eye, and then I put in some prism that would cause me to see double, so I could see what the right eye and what the left eye was seeing as two separate images. And then I modified one or the other until they became almost the same in terms of clarity. And then when I got that prescription, the final prescription, I came out from behind the device to see what it said. And I had a feeling it would say what we call in the vision care field plano. Plano means no prescription, because I was trained that as the eyes uh, develop, let's say, more nearsightedness, the prescription would get stronger. And so if there was less nearsightedness, the prescription should get weaker. And if you could see everything without any lenses, there should be no prescription. Well, I then shocked myself totally, because the prescription in the device was almost identical to the prescription in my glasses. So let me see if I can say that again. Without any lenses in place, I was very comfortably able to see 300% better, one line better than the 2020 line, 2015. But when I check the optical measurements of my eyes, which is what the eye doctor does when you go in for an exam, it showed a prescription of nearsightedness with a pretty hefty amount of astigmatism. And then all of a sudden I was puzzled, because those two things couldn't occur according to anything that I had learned or read about.
What's astigmatism again?
Astigmatism is usually that there's a different curvature either on the cornea of the eye or inside the eye in one area versus another. So
Okay.
let's say if we were looking at the cornea, which is the clear tissue over the colored part of the eye, the iris, you could say the curvature horizontally was one, and the curvature vertically was very different. So as the light hit those meridians, it focused in different places in the eye,
Right.
making it more difficult to see. What I then encountered wasn't supposed to be able to occur by anything that I had ever read or had been taught or even experienced. And yet it had occurred. And of course, we're all led to believe that we see with our eyes.
Yeah. So what you're really saying is that the machine said you still had these faults in your eyes, which should disrupt your vision. But when
Right,
you used your eyes, you had clear vision.
right.
So something was happening between the eye itself and the actual experience of vision.
Yes, or or it is possible to see with some other aspect of our humanity
Yeah.
that I had not directly experienced in this way before. And so I didn't need my glasses any longer, so I stopped wearing them. That was in 1976.
It's a while ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. Now, if something like that happened for a couple of minutes, you'd say, "Oh my God, that's unbelievable."
Let me keep meditating.
Yeah, but if something like that happens and remains, it do it changes everything because, we've been led to believe we have to do something. In fact,
Yeah.
you began your question, "What did you do? Ta 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 ta."
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I realize that this totally occurred without doing anything that I was consciously aware of. It was almost as if at an instance when I wasn't looking in my habitual way, something that at one time was naturally there and perhaps uh, was being camouflaged by what we think is normal, which is often unnatural. For an instance, something allowed an awareness of this special state.
Hmm.
Or maybe it's not even special.
Right.
Maybe it is our natural state that we have been conditioned out of.
Yes.
So that has remained. Um, Over the years, I had many times my vision examined in different parts of the world, in Japan, in several locations in Europe, in Puerto Rico, in the US, and they would find I was nearsighted and had astigmatism, and but couldn't understand how I was still able to see, even though they said to me, "I don't want to be on the road with you." But I've been driving since I'm 14. I've never had an accident, and then sometime in the last 15 years, I got examined and I was no longer nearsighted with astigmatism.
That's impressive.
I
Interesting.
was now farsighted with
Oh,
astigmatism,
wow.
which should make reading more difficult. And as you know, we get past the point, I was taught that at the age of 40, all of a sudden you realize that God didn't make your arms long enough. And so you're having to hold things further away or buy over the counter cheaters, they call them, or get reading glasses. But that didn't happen to me. I'm 77. I'll be 78 in November. And I don't wear reading glasses. And even though the farsightedness should have made it more difficult, it didn't. And so the question is, what happened? So I want to see if I can answer that with an experience, a little story I had that I think you'll find interesting.
Sure.
In the late 80s, I was invited to speak at a psychology conference, And I was speaking about my work with light and color and some discoveries I had been making about how people responded, why they responded differently to different colors, and so on. And when the talk ended, people began raising their hands to ask questions. And there was a lady in the audience, and she stood up and she said that she was a neuropharmacologist. The meeting was in Washington, D.C., and that she had been doing some work on mind body interactions and so on, and found many things that I was saying uh, fascinating. She'd never heard anyone talk about these things in this particular way. And so I was intrigued by what she was doing, and I asked her to share a little more. And she essentially started saying that she was finding that the thoughts, ideas, beliefs that we identify with as ours, if you will, are reflected in our biology.
Mm-hmm.
And then what blurted out of me from where I do not know was, what happens if you don't have a point of view?
Right. Very good.
And her jaw dropped a little bit, and she said, "Is that possible?" I said, "Absolutely." And she said, "God, I've never actually considered that." Well, that woman and I became friends and spent years communicating up until the time of her passing. Um, and Her name was Candace Pert.
Oh, I studied Candace Pert a lot. I've read
Yeah.
her books. Yes. Well, that's amazing. What
And
a what
so,
an amazing coincidence that it's her.
right. And we, over the years, we had incredible discussions because I shared with her what I just shared with you about my vision. And it was almost as if in that meditation, I slipped into a state of awareness with no point of view.
Right.
And
No mind.
yes, and my feeling was that this was in some way perhaps what causes spontaneous remission.
Mm-hmm.
And that I also got in touch perhaps with seeing from no mind.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, this last year, I was invited to a 70th birthday party of a dear friend of mine who's a pretty renowned psychologist. And most of the people at the party were therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, some of them best selling authors. And as I was being introduced to some of these people and met some of them, they were sharing something of what they were interested in, which was intriguing to me. And several of them used the term mindfulness, which is a very common term today that
Yes.
I don't relate to at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked, "What does that mean to you? Mindfulness." Now, I know what they mean,
Yes, of course you
but
do. Yeah.
I needed to ask, and in one way or another they kept describing mindfulness as unfiltered awareness.
Right.
And so I said, "Isn't that mindlessness?" And they said, "Yes." They said, "Oh my God." And all of a sudden they realized that they use this common term, but the term doesn't actually reflect the state.
No.
It's almost like a map from New York to San Francisco that is taking you east,
Mm-hmm.
but you never get to your destination. And you go to an Italian restaurant, you see the word pizza,
Mm-hmm.
but that word has absolutely nothing to do with the experience of biting into pizza
Right.
or any other meal. And yet we treat them as if they are the same thing.
Right.
Sometimes when I'm interviewed and I share the experience about my vision, often the interviewer would say, "Oh, you had an out of body experience."
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you hear that term and people sense they know what that is, and then they put that term into an experience that I have no words for. That you've asked a question and I'm doing my best, but I don't know what the hell happened there. I mean, something mysterious, magical, whatever, and it stayed with me. And so for years, 4 or 5 after that experience, I had an ongoing experiment I called an experiment on the workings of my mind.
Yes.
Because at the time, I was sure this thing called mind was mine, and I identified with it. And I kept feeling like, is there some sort of something in my head that if, like a button, that if I could find where it was and innervate it, I could have an awareness that would allow me to share this with other people? Because I thought, oh my God, I would love to be able to share this. It's such a beautiful experience that took me way beyond a change in eyesight.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I could not, with all the things that I attempted to do during this period, I could not find any conscious way of mentally getting to this place. And uh, people in the last 25, 30 years, they're very interested in awakening. And we hear these terms like enlightenment and so on, and so many techniques as if it's a path that you take and then you arrive. I haven't actually found that, or at least whatever awakening has occurred in my life, it always came as a surprise. And I remember in 1994, I was in traveling through Australia teaching, and one of the people that was hosting me, uh, I learned very shortly after arriving there that they lived without eating.
Yeah.
And so, sometime after that, I decided to try this experiment. And so
Mm-hmm.
I didn't eat for 9 weeks.
Wow. That's a long
And
time.
yeah, and what's fascinating is the first 7 days, you not only don't eat, you don't drink.
Right.
And so it was fascinating because many people would ask me about this and say, "Well, did you become enlightened?" And I said, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but my sense is that if we have an awakening, it's not related to me not eating or me eating a certain way. I, d- I don't sense that it has anything to do with something we've done, uh, and so on. And so my vision experience has lasted for a long time. Um, what just came to me right now is when my second book, Take Off Your Glasses and See, which was triggered by this experience, came out. I gave the first two copies to my parents who had worn glasses since I was a small child. And initially it was just glasses for distance, and then it was bifocals, and then it was trifocals. And I sent them the books, and I don't know, the following year, I'm not even sure if it was an entire year. I was living in Colorado at the time. I traveled to Miami and I stayed with them, which I never really did in the past, but I went ahead and I stayed with them. And I noticed at a certain point, neither one of them was wearing their glasses. And before I left, I asked, and they both said they stopped wearing them after reading the book.
Excellent.
And then I realized that words, even though we think we are speaking them, but when that information is just coming through from where I do not know, that level of wisdom, or whatever we want to call it, can have medicinal value.
Yes.
It literally can trigger something, that um, we can't even begin to imagine. And so, what's important about this experience? Uh, sure, it's great being able to see without glasses, but what's really important is beginning to see what is typically invisible,
Yeah.
and noticing that we are continually receiving information. Some comes in through the senses, but those senses are much broader than anything we typically consciously experience, and are much broader than are typically written about or taught. And when that new level of vision um, becomes activated again, everything looks the same and everything is totally different. It's the same as, you know, if I cover one eye and I look around the room, I see where everything is, and then I cover the other eye and I see essentially the same thing again. And then I uncover the eye and everything is exactly the same, but everything is totally different. All of a sudden, there is a dimensional aspect. We call it stereopsis or depth perception. And we think depth perception is just being able to know where my cup is in relation to the monitor. But depth perception is about seeing deeply. And so that's really what my life's work is about, is about seeing the ordinary things that can catalyze extraordinary experiences and yet are often just missed.
Yeah.
And so that's the sweetest part of my life now.
Many people today actually think the word myth is the equivalent of saying something's a lie, which is a very, very dangerous social conundrum that we're in, because really the word myth is synonymous with story. We are all living our story, which is our myth. It's very important to realize that your story creates the contextualization or the perception of what's happening in your life and why it's happening. So when we look at myth and we realize that myths come from a variety of different cultures all over the world, pretty much every culture, and myths were stories that were containers for their life experience that helped them understand the life process and how to navigate it and how to understand the different events such as birth, death, and things that are, inherent to life itself. Then you have a sense of who you are, and you can make meaning of the world from the context or the perspective of your myth. And with our new sense of who we are, which gives us a new worldview, we now, from the perspective of having a sense of who we are, can look back and see that many of our judgments, feelings, insecurities, fears, and anxieties were ultimately rooted in this sense of not knowing who we are or where we were going or why we were here or what we're doing here or what our innate genius is that we've come to the world to share. And when we actually look at ourselves from that vantage point, we can often see that there is a golden thread of meaning, and that the trauma, for example, that happened with mother or father gave us an awareness, if nothing else, of how we don't want to raise our own children, which can change the lives of our children. So actually, at the end of the day, when you look at how important myth is to our sense of who we are in our worldview and our ability to heal from a perspective of having a deeper sense of who you are, it changes your whole life. It's changed my life. It's changed the life of many, many of my patients and my students around the world. And I'm excited to be able to share this process with you, because I'm absolutely 100% sure that if you follow my lead and do what I teach in my upcoming myth workshop on how to create your own myth and live it, you will be amazed at the experience that you have, and you'll probably really enjoy all the amazing people that are in the process with us. And as I often suggest, use your heart to feel what you know. If you feel a pull and that this is the right time for you to enter this work and get into yourself and find your wholeness, then I'm excited to share this opportunity with you.
Paul's upcoming online workshop, Creating and Living Your Myth, is starting soon. This workshop is a combination of self-paced study and virtual group sessions with Paul, where he answers questions and guides you as you write your own myth. To find out more, go to paulchek.com/events. That's paulchek.com/events.
That's great. I think it's a beautiful story, and that's why I wanted to kind of kick the podcast off with that, because I think it really opens the doorway for a lot of introspection for the listeners. And, I really feel that in many ways, one of the big challenges we're facing in the world right now is that we're over-minded. We're just saturated in
Right.
in information. The ancient alchemists called the mind the logos cutter, and they warned that the mind's function is to cut the whole so you can have a piece of it and try to make meaning out of it, because to see the whole is so vast and so full that you can't, for example, if you're looking at a herd of cattle, but you want to point something out to a ranch hand, you might have to say, the black and white one that's got a broken horn is the one I want you to brand.
Right.
But the right brain sees the whole herd. But if we don't have this cutting function, then we can't really make meaning out of the whole, which you don't need to make meaning out of the whole in a state of no mind, because you're one with it.
Right.
But when we get so, and Ian McGilchrist, a famous psychiatrist, written multiple books on the functions and the differences of the left brain, and he's very thorough in his explanation that we've become so trapped in our left brains and so caught in this kind of mental relationship with everything that we're actually bringing ourselves into all sorts of problems. And I think you've really beautifully described the experience of reconnecting to and becoming conscious of the wholeness, but then being able to import that experience back into the world without losing the wholeness, while still being able to see objects, people, places, and things, but not fall off the wagon of the wholeness. And I think the mind has a real tendency to belief systems and isolation and segregation. And it's rare that a person can have one foot in the world of wholeness and one foot in the world of mind or division or labeling. It reminds me, Aubrey Marcus, who's a very famous podcaster and friend of mine, once was having a podcast with me because he wanted me to share my opinions on evil and the devil, because he had had a very scary plant medicine experience that really shocked him to his core, where he had kind of encountered evil and the devil. And what I shared with him is something I think that you'll really appreciate. I said to him, because I've done many of these deep ceremonies and I do it professionally. And I said to him, Aubrey, whenever I encounter these types of experiences, I simply let go and go to the state of no mind, because no mind is no devil. There can't be a devil when you're in no mind. So the point I was making to him is, you got to realize is that the plant medicines are showing you what's in your unconscious, and therefore making you conscious of the devil that you keep creating through the use of your own mind. So if you want to free yourself of devils, then you have to free yourself of mind. And it was very hard at the time for him to really wrap his head around, but until you've had experiences of no mind like you're describing, which I've been blessed to have many of, you don't realize how dangerous the mind is to our capacity to experience wholeness and to really be our authentic selves, is what I would say.
So, wow, lovely. I think it would be interesting to examine how we are built,
Mm-hmm.
because what you say is absolute truth in relation to my direct experience. What you shared was not an idea.
No, it's an
Mo-
experience.
right. Most people don't realize that belief means the opposite of truth. And so, what we believe often is not the basis for what's actually occurring, but the
Mm-hmm.
direct experience, the unfiltered awareness is profound. And I've had a feeling for a long time that if we are accessing these states, then we must be built for it.
Yeah. Yes.
And so, one of the things that I've been intrigued by is what is mind? We
Mm-hmm.
use that term, And everyone thinks, oh, they know what that is, but what exactly is that? And then we also speak about intuition, where you see something that isn't actually yet there.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of it seems to be related to seeing. And because seeing was a field that life took me into, I began looking at the way the eye is designed and what its capabilities are, because I wanted to see if seeing with the eye or the brain or the mind, how is that related to seeing through this other intuitive sense? Sometimes you have referred to it as clairvoyance and so on. So I discovered some fascinating things which I want to share, which I've never heard a vision specialist speak about. And
Good.
yet, and yet I think it's the most exciting thing regarding the eye. When you look at the back of the eye, it has about 140 million photosensitive cells, cells whose job it is to detect light. Why? Because light is married to the eye. And when the light catches the eye, it unconsciously, reflexively moves it toward the next thing that requires our attention. And it does that effortlessly. And the movement of the eye, which is totally unconscious, it's reflexive, takes no effort, no doing. And my sense is that the whole concept of doing is just a concept that is unrelated to the reality of the universe and the way that it functions and how things are animated. And so, for instance, right now, I have no conscious awareness of what's going on. Something is expressing itself through me that just got awoken because of something that was speaking through you.
Mm-hmm.
And then a conversation occurs and everyone thinks, wow, that's some interesting stuff they're talking about. But actually, they're not talking. S- Something is talking us
Yeah.
in the same way as something is breathing us,
Yep.
in the same way as something is animating our
Mm-hmm.
heartbeat and regulating every physiological function, of which there is no part that is designed to initiate action.
Mm-hmm.
All of it is responding reflexively by itself in response to the continual changes that we say are constant.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I looked at the back of the eye, 95% of those cells in the back of the eye that detect light are called rods.
Mm-hmm.
Rods are highly sensitive, mostly functioning at nighttime. They are the precognitive aspect of the visual system. They feel reality rather than scrutinize it.
Beautiful.
5% of the cells are called cones.
Mm-hmm.
The rods are spaciously distributed throughout the eye with a lot of breathing room between them. The cones are jam-packed like sardines in a can in a tiny little area called the macula or fovea centralis, the part of the eye that is responding to the question, which is better, one or two?
Yeah.
Now, the third Zen patriarch, someone named Sengsten, about 1750 years ago, wrote a magnificent piece called the Sin Sin Ming. This is the first verse. The first line of it is particularly powerful. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. In other words, the great way, the kingdom of God, however it is termed, is what becomes evident when there's no point of view.
Mm.
And then the next line says, when love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the slightest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, hold no opinions for or against anything. To hold what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind.
Mm.
When the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. What's interesting is most of the eye is designed to sense reality, and a tiny part of the eye, the part that cuts the whole, as you said, is designed to look when our survival might be at stake.
Right.
So we have a part that sees the whole, and we have an aspect that sees the part when necessary.
Right.
Now, the cells in the fovea, the ones that answer the question, which is better, one or two, the ones that have the preferences, they're not anywhere near as sensitive as the rods. I'll tell you how sensitive the rods are. A rod can detect and respond to a single photon.
That's pretty sensitive.
Let me tell you how sensitive it is. It is the most sensitive aspect of any living thing, and it is more sensitive than any technology that we have developed that detects light. In other words, we are designed to see the invisible.
Mm-hmm.
We are designed to see the formless before it has gotten alchemized into form.
Mm-hmm.
No one has ever shared that with us. We have been conditioned to see life as we were led to believe it is supposed to be. And that conditioning incarcerates not only the visual system's ability to see the invisible, because photons define invisibility. You
Mm-hmm.
can never magnify them enough to see what it is. And so, what occurred to me in 1976? Something tapped into that ability that we as humans have to detect the invisible, and all kinds of things have opened since then.
Hi, guys. What do you reach for when you want a little pickup, when you want a little happy making? There's lots of things that I used to love For example, I used to love my espresso in the afternoon, but that caused me lots of problems. So I had to retool that one. Uh, there's a lot of things that have sugar in them, but my body hates that. If you want to be healthy and you want to be clean, there's not much you can do. But Organifi's got some new happy drops that, believe me, are really good. And they're simple. They've got passion flower, go-to cola, organic saffron, and ginger root extract. And these things are awesome. You put a couple in your mouth. I like to suck them and let them melt down slow. And in a few seconds, you are feeling happy again with a little mood elevation and a little energy lift too. I absolutely love these things. My kids love them. And the thing I love about them is they make me feel good without doing anything but good for me. So if you want to get some happy drops, go ahead and try these. You're going to be amazed. I absolutely love these things, and my kids love them too. And I know you're going to love them. And you don't have to feel guilty about it because there's nothing in there that's bad for you at all. Far better than an addictive anything, and great for you. Try Organifi's Happy Drops.
To try Organifi's new Happy Drops and to get 20% off your order, go to Organifi.com/Chek20 and use the promo code Chek20 at checkout. That's Organifi.com/Chek20. Organifi.com/CHEK20. And the promo code is CHEK20 for a 20% discount.
To give you an example, I, like most people when we were kids, we used to go to the dentist if we had a filling or something, and they would give us a shot of Novocaine. So they didn't want you to feel pain. Sometime in the late 70s, I had a little bit of a tooth discomfort because I had never had a toothache. And I went to my dentist, and he referred me to an endodontist because he said I had a root canal that needed to be done. And for the last year or so, I don't know, I would go to the dentist. I had to have fillings, but I didn't want Novocaine. And I was aware of what the dentist was doing, but I felt very safe in their hands. I didn't experience any discomfort. And so I went to this endodontist, and he confirmed with his associate that I needed a root canal. I said, okay, let's do it. And then, of course, they were ready to inject me. I said, I don't need that. No, that's impossible. Everybody needs that. I said, I don't actually need that. And I would like you to do the procedure without it. And if you sense at any time that I am uncomfortable, or if I sense at any time, let's let each other know. And if you sense it, and even if I don't, I will trust you and go ahead and you can give me the shot. But at this moment, I feel totally at ease and I feel comfortable with you. Let's begin. Well, for whatever reason, even though he said he had never done it before, he started doing whatever he was doing. And before very long, the root canal was finished. I didn't feel any discomfort. And he was speechless. I've had a few root canals since then. I've never had Novocaine. My dentist here, who's been practicing for many, 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 many years, said that working on me has changed his life.
That's great.
He said, he's Japanese, and he said, as a young boy, we didn't have anesthesia, and it was so painful, I never wanted my patients to suffer. But even though I give them Novocaine, they're still so uncomfortable on some level that I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. You have made me realize I don't need to walk on eggshells any longer. And he said, I feel so at ease with my patients now because I see how comfortable you are when I'm doing these things. Well, that didn't exist before this vision experience,
Right.
but it came into place afterwards and it's impacted many aspects of my life. So, as I said, awareness is curative. Seeing differently can be a life changer and can create a permanent shift without actually doing anything. And that by itself is like, whoa, to this day, that really moves me. And so sharing my experience while I was practicing, which I haven't in many, many years, but while I was practicing, I would routinely share this with people. And I found that sharing my direct experience with them sometimes gave them the license to potentially have a similar experience.
Mm-hmm.
And very often, I would share this with vision care practitioners when I used to do a lot of events for doctors. And routinely, people's visions would change within hours.
That's
And
beautiful.
and I remember doing an event with a group of eye doctors in Australia, and just asking them to just remove their glasses, and then I began to share this experience. And very shortly after removing their glasses, many of them became very edgy. They said they couldn't hear well without their glasses on.
That's amazingly interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. And I had all these doctors, I had their eyesight checked by one or two of the doctors in the group, and then they were rechecked 4 or 5 hours later, and there was a significant improvement in everyone's eyesight, everyone. And then I asked them if they would consider continuing the experiment by getting a ride home without their glasses on. And they went ahead and did that. And when they came back the next day, the person with the strongest prescription, whose eyesight without their glasses was 2600.
Wow.
That's a letter that's, I don't know, a foot tall.
Yeah.
And that person's eyesight improved to one line above 2020
That's pretty good.
in
That's very
20
good.
in 24 hours doing nothing. And she cried as she shared the experience. And then she started sobbing. And I said, "What's happening?" She said, "This was a miracle for me. And when I got home and I shared with my husband what happened, he said, 'That's terrible.'" And I looked at him, not understanding what was happening. And he said to me, "How will you sell glasses?"
Yeah, this is why they say it's hard to change a man's belief system when their paycheck depends on it.
Right. So, what's fascinating is how incarcerating our conditioning is.
Mm-hmm.
And um, I mean, an infant has no sense of gender, has no sense of religiosity, of skin coloration, has no preferences. And yet we develop a persona,
Mm-hmm.
which is a mask
Yeah.
of who we think we're supposed to be. And
Yep.
perhaps the awakening is the realization that the word persona, which comes from the Latin personare, means to peer through, which means that our essence is not the persona, the mask, but that which is peering through the mask. And I think that awakening is the source of perhaps the greatest humility,
Mm.
because we realize how miraculous life is,
Mm, yes.
and that um, the ordinary sharing, like what we're doing right now, is perhaps the greatest source of our philanthropy.
Yeah, I think that's true. That's what inspires me to do the podcast.
Y- Absolutely. I mean, I was inspired to share these experiences, even though, which required writing. I was never a writer. I was never a reader. I
Mm.
have read very little in my lifetime. That was not the way that things came to me.
Me either.
And yet, and so writing a book was like I can't do that. And yet, that inspiration, which is what moves all of us in the way that we move, has brought me to this moment where I get to have a conversation with you about what's really exciting for me and what really matters for me. And because responses are related to request,
Mm.
without an excellent request, one does not receive the opportunity to feel a unique response that comes, that perhaps was never shared before.
Right.
And so your questions elicit the opportunity for a whole new level of listening or noticing what's coming through,
Yeah.
and just allowing ourselves to be spoken.
Yes.
So
I wrote some notes down as you were going so I could not interrupt you, but I got a few interesting things I'd like to share with you and
I love it.
see what rises. First of all, do you know what Saint Francis of Assisi used to tell people when they would ask him, "How can I find God? I'm trying and trying, I can't find God."
No, no,
You'll love it. He said, "What you are looking for is what's looking."
right, right. That
How's
is
that?
that is absolutely magnificent. I think it was Meister Eckhart who said something like that. Uh, Something about we see God through the same eyes that God is seeing us,
Right.
and there is such a deep truth it in what Saint Francis shared almost makes me want to cry.
Yeah, well, it's pretty
It's
profound. Most people don't sit with it. They just intellectualize it, but they don't really realize what he's actually saying.
oh yeah, it's yeah, it's hmm,
What he's saying is you don't need a bunch of books and temples and churches. You just need to be exactly what you've been saying, aware.
you know, and we're born with that awareness,
Absolutely.
and something is guiding everything within us.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, at the end of each day, at some point, all of us fall asleep.
I hope.
Yeah. And sometime the following morning, without an alarm clock, something awakens us.
Yeah. Spirit.
Yeah. My wife and I, we live in Maui, and outside of our house is a road. And we walk up the road all the way to the top, and it's a little over 2 miles uphill. And then we walk the other little over 2 miles downhill. And I noticed something interesting uh, as we're walking back. Most people are walking and in the process not noticing that something is walking them.
That's great.
And so yesterday, as and I've noticed this many times, but yesterday we were walking back home and I noticed that my feet, my legs by themselves were just moving one in front of the other. And I noticed the speed of that was changing all by itself. And it was like, oh my God, something is walking me. And I can't tell you how profound these things are because so much of the stress, and perhaps most of the stress that we encounter, is based on thinking.
Mhm.
And of course, I think means I don't know.
Yep.
And yet we have been conditioned to use this tool rather than allowing that tool to come into play when it's needed.
Right.
We are trained to use that tool all the time. And I think what we call mind is a function of the brain's left hemisphere language center. It's
Mhm.
called Broca's area.
Yeah.
And my sense is that Broca's area is probably a part of the brain that evolved when human beings were communicating with each other and were attempting to share something, because that language center puts a label on something, on what we call direct experience. What the rods of the eyes do is they provide for us the anatomy and physiology required to see the invisible, to have the psychic or the clairvoyant experience, to have what we call intuition. Perhaps there's other factors as well, but this is something that's become very obvious to me because so much of what we take in a lifetime is via the sense of sight or vision.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a magnificent gift. I see
Mm-hmm.
means that something knows.
Yeah.
Knowing is different than thinking.
Yes.
Life is not what we think.
Right.
And so seeing is very, very profound. We have become an indoor culture.
Yes.
We don't get enough sunlight.
Yeah.
We sit in front of monitors or in front of handheld devices.
Where we keep getting reminded.
Right.
Hello, my fellow spiritual warriors and world workers. I hope you're enjoying this podcast as much as I am. It is no secret that today we are not only bombarded with so called health and fitness information from every angle, be it social media, TV, podcasts, etc., but clearly it's not working. Many studies conducted worldwide show that children, teens, adults, and the elderly are the most unhealthy, overweight, and the sickest they've ever been. But it does not have to be that way for you. When I wrote my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, I researched the number of diet books available at that time, and there were over 5,000 of them, each claiming to have the right diet for anyone and everyone. But the reason I wrote How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy was because these books all overlook the fact that no two people are the same, and therefore no two people are likely to get good results on the same diet. That's simply fact. Another reason the myriad of diet approaches available today fail so often is that they don't look at the underlying causes that lead to body health and mental emotional challenges. They treat the human being as though it were a machine, and all you need to do is add this liquid or that supplement, and presto, the machine runs again. These issues are more important than ever considering the physiological, mental, emotional, environmental stress and toxicity in the world today. Today, it is critical to learn the essentials of how to eat, hydrate, breathe, cultivate life force energy, and use your mind to create the life you've always wanted to live. This is exactly what you will learn in our upcoming Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1 training program, live with my wife and master instructor, Angie Chek. This workshop is designed for anyone that genuinely wants to be healthy and is ideal for fitness enthusiasts, athletes, and parents. It's also a great chance to explore and see if you want to move into our Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 2, which is our professional level training, and pursue a career as a holistic lifestyle coach today when it is so desperately needed. Not only will you be taught by Angie Chek, one of the most knowledgeable experts in holistic health in the world, I will make guest appearances and answer questions. HLC1 is a rare opportunity to take HLC1 training live at our beautiful Rainbow home atop of a mountain in Fallbrook, California with beautiful views, and you get to enjoy my amazing stone-charged water and work out in my beautiful gym. So if you want to learn from a true master in person and get your most important questions answered, don't miss this special opportunity. If you want to meet other holistically minded people and grow your conscious community, there is no better place than our live workshops. In this important, practical 3-day training program, you will learn how to apply the 1, 2, 3, 4 approach to developing long-term body-mind changes and how to apply the 5 essential program design factors. Learn to use your Chek nutrition and lifestyle questionnaires for assessing physiological load and making essential diet and lifestyle changes. Understand the relationship between the 6 Chek foundation principles and body-mind stress. Learn how to apply the 6 Chek foundation principles to balance your body systems so you can exemplify well-being. Identify common roadblocks to success with diet and lifestyle modifications and gain simple solutions. Discover how to use the less is more principle of exercise prescription. To learn more and register, go to chekinstitute.com/core. That's chekinstitute.com/core. I'm sure this will be a life-changing workshop for anybody that attends, and I look forward to seeing you all here at our beautiful home in Fallbrook, California. Enjoy.
HLC1 with Angie Chek will be held on May 30th to June 1st, 2025. To learn more and to register, go to chekinstitute.com/core. That's CHEK institute.com/CORE. Don't miss this only opportunity to take HLC1 live and in person with Angie this year.
You know, before I mentioned the little experiment I used to do about covering one eye and the other, and the difference between the vision with either eye individually and both eyes together. Well, there's something really profound about that. There must be a reason we have two eyes rather than one in the center of our forehead. And those two eyes, each seeing from a slightly different angle, give us, as I mentioned, stereopsis or depth perception. They allow us to see deeply into things. Anything that blocks that function creates instantaneous stress. So you get into an elevator, the doors close. Many of the people in the elevator can't breathe all of a sudden as well because they're closed off. You take naval personnel, you put them in a submarine, they have excellent eyesight, they come out a month later and they're nearsighted. You take animals, you put them in a confined environment, doesn't have to be really small, but where the vision can't escape, they become myopic. So, and the body experiences that in the same way as it does when we experience something stressful. Blood pressure, respiration, all of that gets to a stress level. And so, why is that important? Well, visual deterioration, the need for glasses and so on, which we see everywhere we look, it's the biggest health epidemic in the world. More people are wearing glasses, and yet hardly anyone is born needing them, which means genetics plays much less of a role than our way of living and the things we do each day. So we have an epidemic of nearsightedness and astigmatism and vision deterioration. I even think macular degeneration is caused because of overuse of the macula. What is the macula? The macula is the mind's eye. The macula is it better one or two? Oh, I want that, but I don't want that. And you know, you mentioned about the difficulties that we experience because of our conditioning about that what makes us more evolved than the other species is we have this function that can think. Rarely does someone say, well, how accurate is that function?
Right.
Does it, you know, I mean, most of what we worry about never occurs.
Exactly.
It's so, it's if to be set free from some of those ideas requires to take the time to see, is that really true? Is it true? So for years, I spent working with young children and teenagers that were having difficulties in school similar to the ones I had. And I discovered something fascinating. They all were trying so hard and they couldn't succeed. And everyone was putting them on medications like Ritalin, which sort of came into being when I was in the early years of my practice, or they were getting tutoring, and all these things helped in one way or the other, but they weren't really getting to something. And so I began developing uh, techniques or experiences that would allow a child to actually notice what happens every time they try to figure it out.
Mm.
And what they noticed and what I notice is that every time we begin thinking, we simultaneously collapse the natural expansion and contraction that we call the respiratory cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as that occurs, the field of vision begins to collapse. And so we no longer see life as a whole, we see life through a hole. And so
Mm-hmm.
we only see a small part of the picture. And what the children were noticing is that they would get tongue tied,
Mm.
which was really a symptom of being brain tied. Their brain would literally lock up because rather than functioning in the way that it naturally functioned, we were trying to make something happen.
Yeah.
We were doing things because we wanted something else to happen. And it reminds me of when I was a kid and my dad and I would get into it, and my mother would say to my father, "Joe, can't we just change the subject?" And my God, we use the mind to unconsciously change the subject or attempt to when something is not feeling quite right. And I keep noticing that all of our good ideas come with side effects that are not noticed, that they're not noticed at the moment.
No.
And all of a sudden we start noticing side effects. And, you know, uh, so boy, am I grateful for so many of the experiences I've had in the process of engaging with children and adults and professional athletes. I've learned so much just from noticing what happens. And when we are placed in a situation that is a little different, to give you an example, in the book Take Off Your Glasses and See, and in the most recent book Luminous Life, I share a technique with arrows where I create a chart of arrows moving in different directions, like 5 rows of arrows. And and I've done this with hundreds of people simultaneously when I was giving a keynote address. And it's fascinating to see what they experience, where initially I might say, at whatever pace feels comfortable, just call out the direction of each arrow. And immediately you hear the mind going into stress. And so, as soon as I'm aware of that, even before they've begun, I said, would any of you be willing to share what just happened inside that no one else heard but you? And they start raising their hand. And people would say, "Oh, I'm sure that I'm going to look like a fool
Mm.
because I always used to confuse my rights and lefts and so on." And so that was the beginning of it. And so I would say, well, just take a breath in between each one. And it was interesting, but when they did that, the answers came by themselves.
Beautiful.
This is really important. The answers come by themselves.
Your next book has to be Take Off Your Mind and Learn.
Yeah, exactly. And so then when after they were able to do that, I would say, "Okay, now let's do the same thing. And as you call out the direction of the arrows, simultaneously move both hands in the same direction." And I would walk them through that until they were able to do that. And again, I would ask, "What was your experience?" And many of them would say, "God, I just wanted to get through it." And I said, "And so what happened with that?" He says, "Well, I started rushing."
Mm.
And I said, "And what happened with that?" He says, "I started making a lot of mistakes." And so they realized that, "Oh, I got to get through it," was creating all kinds of other things. And then when the group was able to do that, I would say, "Would you like to go another level?" And like small children who are having fun, they would say, "Yeah, let's do it again." So then I would say, "Okay, now call out the direction of the arrows and simultaneously allow your arms to move in the opposite direction." And then the whole room, even though no one was saying anything, would become filled energetically because everyone would start to worry. "Oh shit, how am I going to do this?"
Yep.
And so I would ask, "What's going on?" And half of the room or more would say, "Well, I started rehearsing it in my mind."
Mm.
I said, "What is that called?" Uh, and some of them would say, "Well, I'm scared I'm going to get the wrong answer." And I said, "So, in response to that fear, what were you doing?" "I was practicing inside." I said, "Yeah, that's called cheating." I said, "But you're not looking on someone else's paper. You're doing something even more sneaky. You're doing something no one else knows. You're going to see if you can pull the wool over the teacher's eyes or whatever." I said, "I did that most of my life." I said, "But eventually I realized that I was cheating myself."
Yeah.
I said, "Of the experience of seeing what happens when I do nothing." And I said, I thought I was stupid most of my life because of my school experience. And then at some point, I realized that the word genius, the original meaning is guiding spirit.
Yep.
And I was trying to make something happen and didn't realize that something was naturally guiding me.
Mm.
And all I had to do was allow it. But I didn't know how to allow it because I'd been trained to do everything except allow it.
Right.
And so, anyway, the point I was trying to make is that I worked with children and then with pro athletes and so on with techniques like that, initially with their feet on the ground, And then while jumping on trampolines,
No neat.
you don't really know the level of integration until someone is in the midst of action.
Yes.
Uh, and then you begin to see what begins to break down and so on. And it was fascinating to work with these kids in a way that was fun for them and in a way where they discovered that what they'd been trained to do didn't really work.
That's not new, is it?
Uh, y- And yet, hardly anyone knows it. I mean, all of the kids in school are taught today in the same way. And so we not only have these ideas that incarcerate how expansive our life can be, but then we've become an indoor culture with less light. We're confining our field to computers and so on. And all of that gets in the way of our ability to just breathe easily,
Mm-hmm.
to feel, ah. I remember I was asked years ago to do a uh, to share some of these things at a college of optometry in Forest Grove, Oregon. And I got there, and they brought me into an amphitheater where I was at the bottom, and the amphitheater went up, and there were rows and rows of a couple hundred students with computers in front of all their eyes, and only a couple of tiny windows at the very top of the room. And I got in there, and of course, I just speak extemporaneously. So I didn't have any PowerPoints or these kinds of things. And I couldn't do what I wanted to do in there. And I said, everyone, let's get up and let's leave this room. They didn't know what was going on. I took them outside, and outside the buildings were around a large area with trees and so on. And I looked around, and there I saw this beautiful tree. I said, let's sit under that tree. And we did the whole thing there. And it was magnificent. And it was like each of us having a conversation. Um, and it was so lovely. And those students wrote to me for months, sharing with me how magnificent it was to experience something rather than to read about it or to
Mm-hmm.
hear about it, and that the experience had absolutely nothing to do with the descriptions,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it stayed with them.
Yes.
It stayed with them. So I'm not sure exactly whether I answered the question.
you weren't answering a question. You were responding to what I said about Saint Francis of Assisi, but it uncorked a mystery that you wanted to open up
Yeah,
uh,
and
further. And so I've got a few more that
go for it. I
I'll
love
share
this.
with you. Share with you that I'm not really a smoker. I just like to play with nature.
You know what? It didn't make any difference how you played with nature. Um, it's each of us is guided to whatever is the way for us.
Absolutely.
And there's no right or wrong with it. It's there's so many ways, as they say, to scale a mountain.
Yep.
And so, however we are invited to take the journey, it's a blessing. And yeah, yeah, you mentioned using some plant medicines and so on, and
Yeah.
I haven't actually experienced that in many, many, many years.
Right.
And what I wrote about it in 1977 was all recreational drugs, is the way I wrote it at the time, do is open up a naturally present but normally inhibited ability.
True.
And so for me, when I had that recognition, I began looking at how does life offer me that opportunity? How does my everyday existence allow me to feel that exquisite state of oneness,
Yes.
you know? And to this day, um, I never missed that opportunity. And it comes in the most unusual ways. I I notice whatever is catching my eye
Mm-hmm.
is looking for me.
Exactly. I know. I remember you saying that in one of the books of yours I read, and I
Yeah.
love that. In
And
shamanism, they call that flirting. That
aha,
spirit is flirting with you.
right. And I love its flirtatiousness,
Yeah.
and it takes me and moves me toward something or toward someone.
Mm-hmm.
And each time the gift is mind blowing.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just, whoa. And as an example, because I've traveled a lot, often I was sitting on an airplane. And even though I never knew the person next to me, who they were, I'd never met them or seen them before, nor had they seen me, very often a conversation would arise all by itself.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, there's a realization that we are each sharing something that is obviously important to the other one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're both excited about the same thing, even though, how the hell did this happen?
Yeah.
And then there's a point where each of us seem to move into the background, and all there is this excitement, this
Yes.
something. And I realize that that enlightened state is very often two becoming one.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so many things that you've said today have triggered up um, memories in my life, things that occur that are, I don't know, they leave each person with a smile. Uh, and even though we never see each other again, we'll never forget each other either.
Hi, everybody. I'm sure you've heard me bragging about Paleo Valley over the years of listening to my podcast, and there's a very good reason for that. Not only do I love the genius of Autumn Smith, a holistic nutritionist, but her products are phenomenally good. My kids love them, I love them, and we all use them every day. My students love them, my clients love them, and they are absolutely top notch. One of my kids' favorite snacks is Paleo Valley's bone broth in chocolate. They love to make their hot chocolate drink themselves simply by whisking up collagen rich protein powder in a mug of hot water. And I'm happy to let them indulge, as I know it is packed full of great nutrition for them in the disguise of a sweet treat. Even us big kids love our sweet treats. And isn't it great when we can enjoy something that not only tastes great, but is truly great for us? Paleo Valley's 100% grass fed bone broth protein is the only of its kind made from truly grass fed cows raised on pesticide free grass pastures. It's made from bones, not hides, slowly simmered to extract the proteins and nutrients. Gluten free, grain free, soy free, and dairy free, the chocolate mix includes organic coconut milk powder, organic cacao bean, organic monk fruit that makes a sweet, creamy, delicious drink that my kids, family, and friends just can't get enough of. You can also add to smoothies, use it in baking, or mix it with your coffee for a healthy mocha treat. Paleo Valley's bone broth protein is also available in vanilla and unflavored. And I promise you, not only will you love this stuff, your kids will love it. You can giggle and laugh because they think they're getting a sweet dessert right before bed, but they will love it and sleep great. And boy, do we parents love it when our kids sleep great. Enjoy Paleo Valley's amazing products.
Bone broth protein comes in vanilla, an unflavored option, great for adding a boost to your baking, soups, and stews, and also their new and delicious salted caramel flavor, which is now the favorite in the Chek household. Try Paleo Valley's bone broth protein and save 15% on your purchase by going to paleovalley.com/Chek15. That's paleovalley.com/CHEK15. We hope you enjoy Paleo Valley's bone broth protein just as much as we do.
Well, I got some more on the way for you, but I wanted to share on exactly that. Carl Jung called that the third.
Right.
And so he said, essentially what he was saying is that whenever two people get together, the consciousness of each of them merges together and creates a third, like a circle around them, which is the wisdom and the intelligence in each of them becoming one to guide them. And Jesus in the Bible said, whenever two or more get together in my name, I will be there. And what is Christ consciousness? It's love. It's unconditional love.
Absolutely.
So he was saying the same thing that Jung said, but in Jungian psychology, that's called the third. But whenever two or more get together in my name, in the name of love, I will be there. And that means that the two of us come together as one. And that's the beauty of relationship. And what does relationship mean? Relationship.
Right.
To realize the other in yourself.
Yeah, it's lovely.
A couple of things that I wanted to share because they rose up in me as you were talking, and I wrote them down. Are you familiar with the philosopher Chuang Tzu?
I'm sure that I have read something that came from Chuang Tzu.
I bet you have, and I'll probably trigger it in you here.
Yeah.
But Chuang Tzu said something that goes with everything you've been talking about. He said, emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Now, most people have a hard time really getting what he's saying, but he said something else that will make a point that I think will touch your soul. And just remember, emptiness is form and form is emptiness. Chuang Tzu also said, and this is what most people know, that this is how they know of Chuang Tzu without even knowing it was him that says this. He says, if man can dream he's a butterfly, what makes you think a butterfly isn't dreaming he's a man?
Oh, wow.
So what's the point I'm trying to make? The point I'm trying to make is we are completely unconscious emptiness, and then we begin to dream form.
Right,
Emptiness is form, but form actually is emptiness
right.
manifesting itself in and as the dream.
Exactly.
And when we're living our dream and we're in our heart, we are aware of and perceptible to what's making you walk.
Right, right, right. It's very profound. It's
The-
very profound, and it's magnificent when you realize that so many of these things that naturally arise and emerge from us that we're often not even aware of,
Mhm.
but they truly impact. They truly, it's like a pebble falling into a still lake, and something goes on. And where I experience that perhaps the most is with my son and daughter,
Beautiful. Yeah.
who are now full grown adults, and yet are so aware of many of these things that have occurred with the three of us
Yes.
throughout our lifetime together that never leave us on some level. They just imprinted. I shared often that the kids' mom and I completed our relationship when they were very, very young, even though to this day we remain very, very close friends.
Mhm.
And one of my most memorable experiences when my kids were very, very young is that they often called me mommy.
Yeah.
And for me, that was like getting the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
It was like,
Mm,
what could be a more important life, job in one's life than to be a mommy,
right.
And so, yeah, s- we often don't realize how just our extraordinary or ordinary aspect of our life has such an impact on what's going on. And it's,
Yes.
yeah, incredibly powerful.
The there's a couple more things I wanted to share with you. I'm
Sure.
going to go back to mind. Are you familiar with Daniel Siegel, MD, who's a psychiatrist's work?
I've heard the name. I haven't read his work, but
His stuff's great. He's one of the most tapped in holistic psychiatrists probably in the world, but he's written many books on the mind. But he tells the story of spending years and years going to conferences all over the world on the mind. But every time he asked what the mind is, nobody knew what it was, and he
right,
said this kind of drove him crazy. So he was kind of embarrassed of the fact that he's a psychiatrist and none of the psychiatrists or psychologists knew what the mind is. He says this is a
right,
bit of a problem.
right,
So he got together 40 people that he thought were really deep thinkers and had a lot of experience in some aspect of psychiatry, psychology, or the relevant sciences. And it took them, I think he said, 4 years working together to come up with what they thought was a functional definition of the mind. And I'd like to share it with you
oh,
and
I
just,
want to hear this. This is
yeah,
important.
yeah. And I want to share it with you because of your depth of knowledge and all that you've been sharing with us. And I think it'll make for an interesting dialogue. But I have some other things to share with you
Yeah,
after that. Here's his working definition of mind, which I've used a lot in my teachings and my writings because it's quite profound. mind, and embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. Mind, and embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information.
That may be the problem.
Well, you see, there's a lot of ways you can slice this up. So that's why I wanted to put it on the table and see what rises.
The first thing that came up is that may be the problem.
Yeah,
That
it could be.
that we've been conditioned to believe that the mind is regulating.
Right,
And so if the mind is regulating, and if it's my mind,
right.
then I have a job to regulate. And then that fits very much in with a lot of the uh, rhetoric we've heard in the last 10, 15, 20 years. You create your own reality. If you have the secret, then you can make the right choice.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you get sick or if you lose your money or if you get into an accident, how did you create that reality?
Yeah.
And so for me, everything that I have been sharing occurs, my sense is, when that which is regulating everything, the movement of the planets, the movement of the tides, the change of the seasons, all physiological that which is regulating all that
Mm-hmm.
is also what's regulating all that is within us. And so my sense is that when that animating force is allowed to regulate in the way that it does, which is what we notice that quantum physicists speak about when they're talking about quantum mechanics, and the fact that everything is aware of everything else all the time.
Yes.
And so you realize that whatever is animating all of this does it without creating a traffic jam.
Right.
And so for me, it's been about uh, noticing when that is allowed to occur, something communicates through us in a way we could never communicate. No
Right.
matter how much time we spent, and we make the very best PowerPoint presentation, and
Mm-hmm.
you know in fact, I remember when I'm working on a memoir now, and my daughter, God bless her, is a wonderful, both the kids are wonderful writers and editors. And so she has been working with me on it as she did on my last book. And when I gave her the first 10 or 11 chapters, I said, what do you think? What do you think of it, Gina? And she said, Dad, the first 6 chapters just captivated me. I just couldn't put it down. But when I got to the 7th, something changed. And the information was really interesting, but I could tell it had been written by Dr. Lieberman.
Yeah, I know. I
And
remember when you shared that with me, I giggled.
yeah, and all of a sudden I realize that we spend all of our lives becoming the Dr. Chek or the Dr. Lieberman or the one that's supposed to know about this or this or this or this. And then we often lose the sharing of our direct experience
Mm.
and replace it with a translation, which is what mind does. It translates, attempts to translate the direct experience
Mm-hmm.
into some image or verbal expression, which has nothing to do with it. And so the information was fascinating, but it was about somebody describing something
Mm-hmm.
like pizza cannot describe the experience of eating the pizza. It's like somebody describing something instead of sharing the goods with you, you
Yeah.
know. And so for me, I believe that what Daniel Siegel has done along with his colleagues is come up with a definition that fits very well with how most people experience mind.
Mm-hmm.
However, um, I am more intrigued with what occurred for him before he got together with those 40 people, which is the hundreds of people that he asked and nobody knew. And where did they actually go looking? Those 40 that it was distilled down to, the ones, the creme de la creme, they could only go into what they had learned or experienced. And uh, I remember someone, I don't remember who it was, maybe it was the Buddha, but I don't remember. They were asked about perhaps what enlightenment is, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
and
To
if
be
they
awake.
couldn't answer.
Mm.
So they said, well, it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this, and mentioned all the things that it wasn't because they couldn't tell you what it was. And experimentation is really important.
Yeah.
What you see empirically is really important. There was a time when science was based on empirical observation. You saw things in real time. You didn't create the experiment so that it attempted to take out everything that was part of life to see, well, what's the magic ingredient?
Mm-hmm.
There is no magic ingredient. It's the balance of all the ingredients that creates the impact,
Yeah.
not a singular thing. And so, um, my sense is that this question needs to keep being asked.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be really interesting is, if I had that group here, I would put up my pictures of arrows, and I would spontaneously create something and ask what they experience and how is that in relation to what they thought was happening,
Right.
because as I say, life is not what we think. What we think is a theory, a hypothesis, a concept, a belief, again, which means the opposite of truth. And so it's yeah, our whole system has been overtaken by full mindedness, and whatever that function is that can tell you which cow you want the cowboy to look at, it is an important function. That's why we have it.
Yeah.
But the reason it only occupies 5% of the cells of the eyes is because 95% of the job is happening without a thought, without a second look,
Yeah.
because we're not being chased by saber-toothed tigers most of the time.
Not anymore.
We think we are, and so
Yeah.
our heart begins to race, but we're not most of the time. So yeah, it's a very powerful question, um, that I believe, um, I would hope would inspire those of us that are inspired to look for truth beyond opinion.
Right. Yeah.
Um, that we keep asking, we keep asking that question. I still
Mhm.
don't believe we have the answer. Um, but from what I see, um, inspiration comes to us
Mhm.
rather than from us. It's
Mhm.
a message from whatever is coming that's almost like giving us the next step of our curriculum in life.
Mhm.
When we are trying to make things happen, that occurs when inspiration is absent. And
Mhm.
that process is called desperation.
Yes.
And so much of our life is about trying to make something happen,
Mhm.
and people teach courses about that. And
Mhm.
I'm sure that there's probably things that you can do with that to make things happen. I just don't know what the long term impact is of that, or whether it's just a short term kind of thing. And humility is really, really important.
Mhm.
I remember I was watching Larry King live when he was on television years ago, and the book The Secret had just come out, and they invited a bunch of the people to come there and talk. And somewhere near the end of the interview, Larry basically states that he's invited Deepak Chopra to come on line. And Deepak is someone that I know from the 80s,
Yeah.
uh, before people were aware of him. And he asked Deepak, he said, Deepak, uh, some it was about how often he's gotten sick in his life or whatever. And Deepak said, I've never been sick a day in my life. And something in me immediately said, oh shit. And what I meant by that was, be careful what you ask for or what you're sharing. And what I realize is that no one escapes life without getting a cold occasionally.
Mhm.
It's part of the backwashing of the pool. or no one escapes life without perhaps having a broken heart or losing someone that's close to us, whether it's a parent or, God forbid, a child or a dear friend. We're not escaping life. And um, I I once sat in on a talk in Los Angeles by a guy that had written a book about Buddha based on what the people closest to Buddha were said about him. And what was fascinating is he said the most difficult time of Buddha's life occurred after his awakening. And so I realized that we live with a whole bunch of concepts. The real experience is not the concept.
Mm-hmm.
And, um, you know, I believe that I lead a pretty healthy life. Most of our meals, I cook a beautiful dinner every night for my wife and I. We do some exercise, nothing excessive, but we exercise. I attempt to do whatever I can to leave the place in a better shape than I found it, or at least as beautiful as I found it.
Yes.
Um, is that an insurance policy for safety, security, and predictability? Hell no. There's no such things on the planet. And we're led to believe that, oh, you wake up and then all of a sudden you don't get sick anymore. You'll never have financial questions any longer. Relationships will all be perfect, on and on and on. And I remember my dear friend Ram Dass, before he passed away, used to say, "You want to see how enlightened you are? Go visit your in laws for the weekend." You know, and so it's interesting. The experience is often not the things we hear about and we speak about. And I think it's so important to share what really actually occurs in our life, especially a lot of the hardships that we've had, because it's important for us to realize that we're in the same boat.
Mm.
And thank God we're on the same boat. It would be really lonely if we were totally alone. And so it's nice to share the reality of life, which includes incredibly beautiful things
Mm-hmm.
and also includes, as a sensitive, the awareness that there are other things going on out there at the same time. They're not so pleasant. And I remember doing a talk in Miami many years ago at someone's home that invited a bunch of guests, and someone in the audience said, "Well, how do you deal with terrorists?" They said to me. And I said, "You can't." And they said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "All the terrorists think they're doing God's work.
Right.
So, you know, um, you can't convince someone that requires convincing." And I said, each of us has a job, just like every cell in the body has a job. Each of us has a job. And our life is about uncovering the things we know by heart.
If I could interject,
Yeah,
you're saying something pretty important considering who you said you used to talk to, Ram Dass. Each of us has a job.
right.
Ram Dass, God worker.
God,
That's what Ram
beautiful.
Dass means.
I didn't realize that. Beautiful. And so I said to this woman in the audience, the people you refer to as terrorists feel they're doing God's work in the
Yep.
same way as you and I feel like we're doing God's work.
Mm-hmm.
I said, so she said, well, then what do we do? I said, we keep doing our job. And if your job is to bring goodness into the world, keep making deposits of
Mm-hmm.
kindness into the bank account of good feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, at the end of the day, whoever has more assets in there, maybe that's the one that's ahead. I'm not sure. I said, but I can only do what I'm here to do. You know, I said, humans think that there are trees that would provide you fruit salad. I said, but there's no such thing. An apple tree can't give you bananas, and a banana tree can't give you pineapples. I said, everything has a job and brings that kind of fruit or whatever it is into the world. And I said, when you see what you love to do and what puts a smile on your face, perhaps that's your work in the world, whatever
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah. If we had the time, I could break down Daniel Siegel's definition from a metaphysical perspective, which he doesn't talk about at all. But I take things like that and go into dialogue with my soul. And since only God can give a soul, then that's
Right.
God within you. Uh, but maybe some other time we can talk about that where I have time to do that. But there is one thing I think you and I will agree upon. Not that we don't agree. Mind makes a much better tool than a master.
Oh, it's there's no question about that. Um and I remember Einstein was being interviewed by a journalist, and the journalist said, Mr. Einstein, how did you discover the theory of relativity? And Einstein starts to laugh and he said, oh, I think that happened while I was playing the violin.
Mm-hmm.
And the point I'm making is that I think it was Jonas Salk who said uh, intuition instructs the mind where to look.
Mm.
And so all of our work in the world, the making of a tool, for instance, yes, it requires that looking and so on, but there's something that precedes that, which is there's a vision, an inspiration, something that moves us to start jotting down and making pictures of that tool that just came to us while we're in the middle of eating at a restaurant and we start scribbling on a napkin because we just had this download that came to us. We forget about the download and then we want the ownership. Look what
Mm.
I came up with.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to see and experience that step where something just moves us.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's what my life is about today.
That's beautiful. And, one of my notes was on intuition. What I like to do is what Steiner called spiritual investigation. So I take a word like intuition and I say to my soul, I want you to show me how this happens. What is intuition? How does it work? And so when I did that with the word intuition or the concept of intuition, I found myself becoming one with the whole universe, one with
Right.
God, really. And what came to me is that the word intuition means to go into it, to literally become one with it.
Right.
And so when we're when we're intuiting at our best is when we're not thinking, but we're often have a question or something that, like, what is love, for example? I spent years meditating on that, doing contemplative meditation and just posting the question and then just emptying myself. I call it leaving the mailbox open so spirit
Right.
can deliver. Because if you're thinking, you don't, the
Right.
mailman can't deliver.
Exactly.
And so I just saw that because I'm also a remote viewer. So I had to come to grips with how can I possibly do that unless I am one with everything that is? And the mind's just creating the illusion of separation.
Right.
Because the first thing that you got to do to be able to remote view is stop believing you can't do it or you'll never be able to do it. So when I'm clairvoyant. So when I held the vision of intuition, I saw what really is often described as God, a sphere whose circumference is nowhere and a center whose presence is everywhere. And that each one of us is actually the center of the universe because it's
Right.
unbounded.
Right.
And that when we're being guided by spirit or asking spirit for help, I saw what looked like lightning flashes coming through the hole into the
Right.
point that is
Right.
ourself. And then we have this intuitive insight, this flash of intuition,
Right.
but it's actually the wisdom,
Right.
the genius of the whole communicating to itself, which is ourself. And
You
so
know,
to
you're
go
re-
into it.
uh, in relation to what you said, I was speaking somewhere one day, and a gentleman came up to me after the talk, and he said, "Would you mind speaking in a couple weeks for a Sunday service at our church?" I said, "Oh, I'd be delighted to." And he said, "I'd like you to speak about prayer."
Beautiful.
And you just mentioned a few seconds ago when you're searching for something or asking for something, which, of course, prayer is often about that.
Mm.
And so when I got there, he introduced me, and I got up and I closed my eyes. And what came to me is, what if our life is a prayer?
Amen to that. Oh, great spirit.
Not where we're praying for something or to something,
No, yeah.
but we ourselves, through some magic, become the prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And um, yeah, I can't tell you. My wife and I went out for dinner last night at a restaurant we frequent, and a lovely young lady was taking care of us, and I had forgotten her name, even though she took care of us the week before. And I said, I'm so sorry. Would you please remind me of your name again? Because I forgot it. And she said, "Well, my name is Kira, but that's not important that you remember my name because you know my heart."
Yeah.
Now, this young lady and I had never sat and spoken other than giving her an order, letting her know what we were going to eat. And yet she got something about me uh, being very appreciative of her showing up, gifting us with beautiful food, doing it in an impeccable fashion. Um, For me, those are the moments that I never want to let slide by. I can't tell you I'm so grateful when I have those experiences, and very often feel moved to share with those people how wonderful it was for me, how grateful I am for their impeccability. And please tell your mom and dad they did a great job.
Yes, that's beautiful.
Whatever it is, but that's where I feel we have a chance where the two become one, and the drops of individuality fall into the ocean of oneness, and the third comes into being.
If you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you've probably heard Paul raving about one of his absolute go-to supplements, P3OM from Bioptimizers. Well, they've given it a new name, Probiotic Breakthrough. It's the same amazing formulation, just with a new name. Here's a chat that Paul and Wayne had about Probiotic Breakthrough before it changed its name.
Bioptimizers makes an amazing product called P3OM, which is a prebiotic product. And it's amazing for not only helping repopulate the gut with friendly bacteria, but as Wade will tell you, it's really, really an amazing product in case you ever feel like you're getting any kind of food poisoning or illness coming on. And Wade's right here with me, and he's the co-founder of Bioptimizers, and he knows more about P3OM than anybody. But I can tell you this, I've had nothing but excellent results and nothing but positive feedback from all my clients and friends that I've turned on to P3OM. So Wade, tell us a little bit about P3OM and why it works so well.
Well, P3M we call it the Navy SEAL of probiotics.
Amen.
Basically, its job is to kick out the bad guys in your body. Food poisoning is one of those things from bad bacteria. What we've done is we've taken an aggressive strain of L. plantarum. We put it into toxic soup, ran a sine wave to keep a few of them alive. And the few survivors we grow in very specialized medium to make a cultured, patented enzyme that has extraordinary powers. Number one, it survives the intestinal tract.
Yes.
And number two, it absolutely hunts down pathogens in the body, bacteria, viruses, these type of things. And this is really where the future of probiotics is. It is about developing and culturing and creating super strains of probiotic, very much like the Navy SEALs goes through a training, and these individuals have extraordinary powers to deal with chaos. And in today's world where we want to improve our immunity and our function and our gut health, P3OM is head and shoulders above any probiotic out there.
So my understanding is it can be used daily as a supplement, but it can also be used in larger quantities as a defense measure.
We've tested this literally with over 100 of our friends who have been suffering from various times of food poisoning. And a handful of those guys, when you're in food poisoning, and within 20 to 30 minutes, you complete recovery.
That's awesome. And I've seen it happen myself. Angie has felt bad a number of times, and several of people in the house or family have. And I say, take 10. If that doesn't feel good in an hour, take 20. And you've told me you can't overdose on them, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's the beauty of P3OM. You can't take too much. They'll fight off the bad guys, and they'll get your digestion rocking and rolling the way it should.
So if you want to have a healthy gut and you want some defense, carry P3OM with you wherever you go, airplanes, cars, business meetings, hotels, conferences, and you've got your Navy SEALs in the bottle, and they're ready for you anytime. Wade, how do we get a hold of your amazing P3OM product?
Super easy. Just go to www.bioptimizers.com/living4D and put in Paul10 for your 10% discount code. That's BIOPTIMIZERS.com/living4D and Paul10 for your discount code.
You got it. There you go. Try it. You'll love it. I use them. I can't tell you enough how much I love this product. I think it's a genius product. And you've heard it right from the master himself. Get your P3OM. Let us know how you feel about it. Lots of love. Well, I think one of the functions of mind may actually be able to make us aware of when that happens because, as I said, mind is a cutting tool. But if God is unconditional love, by definition, there can be no awareness of anything, or that creates a duality.
Right.
So if we go into this state of being minded, yet ultimately we realize that it's not ever bringing us to the truth of ourselves, and we start having the experiences that we've called no mind, now you're aware of what you couldn't have been aware of before you had a mind. So sometimes to know what something is, you have to figure out what it's not.
Yes. Yeah. Figuring out what is not often disintegrates what is not
Hmm.
and reveals what is.
Yeah. So my
And
point simply that that may be one of the primary functions of mind is for love to become aware of itself at the highest level, which is unity.
yeah, love is the answer regardless the question.
Yes. We're pretty far along in the podcast, and I wanted to make sure I had time for you to give us a little overview of each of your books, because I'm sure many people will not be aware
Sure.
of various books or whatever. And because your writings are so beautiful and so important, I thought maybe if you could just sort of help the listeners get a sense of which book might be the best one for them based on their needs, with a description of what they can expect from engaging each of them.
Each of the books were reflective of what was happening in my life. The first book, Light, Medicine of the Future, was released in January of 1991. And it was sharing with the public how we are impacted by light at the level that I knew it at that time,
Right.
how our physiology is impacted by light. Um, and and then I started going toward the end of the book about some of the things that was uncovering regarding color, um, which was for me one of the greatest discoveries that I made is that um, everybody is impacted by color differently. They like certain colors, they like to a lesser degree other colors, they dislike certain colors. And when I saw that in the 1970s, I started trying to learn what I could. And um, most of the time, everybody said that each color had a different effect.
Yeah.
I didn't find that to be the case. I found that the same color could have opposite effects for two different people.
Absolutely.
And so what I saw was that each of us have a relationship that we think is with the color, but it's actually with the vibration that creates the perception that we have of its color, if you will. And so I started mentioning that toward the end of that book, and some of the incredible things that would surface when people were looking or visualizing colors. And I'll talk about that a little bit more a little bit later before we complete. Um, the second book came out in early 1995, and which was called Take Off Your Glasses and See. And most people looked at that title and they said, "Oh, I love your book, throw away your glasses." And most people thought it was about getting rid of your glasses, but it was about a simple experiment. Take off your glasses and just see what happens. And where it came from was that I would do this with my patients and then later with friends and clients. And when people remove their glasses, as I mentioned earlier, the doctors would say, "Gee, I can't hear you as well." But most people would start getting very fidgety. And I would say, "What's happening?" And they said, "I feel a little bit out of control. I'm afraid I'm not going to see something that's important, or I might run into someone that I don't recognize and I'll be embarrassed." And of course, when they first take off their glasses, I said, "What do you notice?" They said, "I can't see." What? Tell me more. Well, everything is blurry. Then they would start getting into the feelings. I feel out of control. I feel uneasy, and so on. And then I would say to them, When did you first get glasses?" "Oh, I was 12 years old." "And what happened, around the time you were 9.5 or 10? Anything that was important?" "Oh, God, yeah, my grandmother died."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Was there something important about that?" He said, "Oh, yeah, she was like the closest person in my life." Or my parents moved, and all of a sudden I couldn't see my closest friends any longer, and so on. And as they shared a little bit about what happened, I would say, "How did that feel for you?" And they would say, "I felt really out of control and uneasy." In other words, they would use the exact same words to describe the feelings that occurred a couple years before their eyes started to close down as they did when they removed their glasses. And
Mm.
so I use the experience of removing the glasses to get in touch with the primal feelings that were going on before the whole process began.
Yes.
And then over time, I noticed that the colors people were uncomfortable with were resonating or awakening things that were unresolved. Initially, I thought, "Oh, this was something that maybe happened early in their life, whatever." The longer I did this, and I probably have done this with 50,000 people now, the more I began to realize that so many of the issues that we think happened early in our life never occurred. They were something that our parents or our grandparents or our great grandparents experienced and were in some way energetically passed on.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we have a genetic blueprint, we have energetic blueprints and so
Sure.
on.
Yep.
And so color was a very interesting way of noticing vibrationally rather than experientially the aspects of the spectrum of life that we were at ease with embracing
Mm-hmm.
and those that we just needed some distance from.
Right.
And so then because of that, I developed ways of using color which were totally different than anything that I had read, where people were using this color to heal this and this color to heal that. And even though I did some of that in my practice and it was beneficial, as I got deeper and deeper into this, what I realized is that if someone could be comfortable or become comfortable with something that used to feel uncomfortable. Their life opened up.
Mm.
Their visual field became measurably larger.
Yeah.
They could see more and take in more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always worked with all the colors rather than just one or the other. And I would have people utilizing them for very short periods of time each day while they were breathing. And the moment it felt the slightest bit uncomfortable, they would remove them. I didn't want them to confront things, to push through anything. I wanted them to begin to notice a just noticeable difference. The moment they notice the first sense that something was not right, don't push through it, don't toughen up, take them off, allow that to integrate. So you have the ability to experience something that maybe wasn't comfortable, but you didn't swallow enough of it to feel overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. A
And then
homeopathic dose.
it's exactly what do they call it today? Micro dosing.
Yep.
So I would give them micro doses of what I called human homeopathic remedies. I would present the energy that comprised an experience. They're all used to the experience, but few of them are used to the energetic foundation of that experience. And that, through resonance, begins to awaken things within us. And what
Mhm.
I found, Paul, which was fascinating, is that the colors that people were uncomfortable with very often and to a very high degree correlated with the chakras of the same colors in their body
Mm.
being places where they developed issues.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I developed a whole way of utilizing color that wasn't based on a theory, but it was based on empirically seeing what occurred with people. Because in the late 70s, I remember buying some what was called at the time biofeedback equipment, which is just physiological monitoring equipment. And I would hook up my patients and I would have them visualize a color or look at a color. And I noticed the colors they liked brought their physiology into balance, and the colors they liked or disliked to different degrees would trigger their system into a classical stress reaction.
Yes.
And so then I said, oh my God, I think we respond to color in a very unique way that we respond to life.
Mm-hmm.
When after going through my first divorce, uh, I started having panic attacks. And I saw a therapist, first therapist I ever saw. And they said to me, what did you learn from this relationship? And what came out of my mouth from where I do not know, oh, I married my father dressed as a woman. And what I got out of that, because when I started looking at that, I not only noticed that every girlfriend I had and every female teacher I had, except for one, I had a similar dynamic with. But then I realized my closest male friends I had the same dynamic with. And then I realized, oh my God, this is such proof of human homeopathy
Mm.
that we are in some way attracting to ourselves a mirror image of something within us that, if awakened, would allow our awareness to see something in a way we hadn't. And all of a sudden it was like, whoa, this was so clear to me what was happening here. And so my approach to using color was based on, to a great degree, what I learned through the completion of that relationship. And it really opened up a lot of channels. The third book, Wisdom from an Empty Mind, which came out in January of 91, was just a series of little one-page essays and accompanying quotes that were all created by source. They they were things that came through during live talks between 94 and 97, and these talks were transcribed. And then I asked my son and someone else I had been working with before, please find the pieces that are little pearls of wisdom all by themselves. They don't
Yeah.
require editing, changing, nothing. And so that's what that book was about. It was what comes through us when the mind is empty.
Yeah, beautiful.
And so they touch a bunch of little of subjects. I think I got maybe the greatest endorsements I've ever gotten in that little book, um, which I enjoy giving away more than anything else. And so that was the third book. The fourth book came out in early 2018. It was called Luminous Life: How the Science of Light Unlocks the Art of Living. And it was talking about how light is guiding everything physiologically within us. And to give you an example, in 2017, the Nobel Peace Prize in Medicine and Physiology was awarded to 3 U.S. scientists who had discovered how plants, animals, and humans harmonize their physiology with Mother Nature. And it has to do with the circadian system, which we think of as light and darkness. But our physiology is being monitored and guided by light through every micro change in the light spectrum throughout the day and even into the night. And now we know that when the circadian system is out of alignment with nature, which is the case for probably most of the people on the planet, this results in illness. We are suffering from chronic jet lag, but we've never gotten close to an airport.
Yes.
And so much of the problems that we try to repair with this or this or this are just a small smidgen of a much larger thing.
That's why I don't like biohacking. It's not addressing the real issues most of the time.
Right. And we need to get outside and take a short walk in the morning and allow the light of the morning to enter our eyes and our skin and tell our body what time it is, And whether we're in California living on top of a mountain, or whether we're in Maui, Hawaii, living in a eucalyptus forest, or whether we're somewhere else in the world, because our physiology is responding to that accordingly.
Yes.
And if we can take a short walk at the end of the day when the sun is setting, all of that is giving us an incredible amount of nourishment, which we never consider. See, most of us think that our nourishment and so on is coming from the food that we eat, and about a third of it does. But two-thirds of the nourishment that our cells use to create the ATP, the energy that allows a cell to do all of its metabolic functions, to heal itself, repair itself, and so on. That comes directly through the ingestion of light. The whole field of photobiomodulation, what people know as red light therapy, is basically telling us that that light impinging upon the skin, and most of it comes in through the eyes, is deeply impacting every aspect of our life and giving us most of the energy that is part of our life source.
Yeah.
So it's really important to just get out in nature, take your shoes off, hug a tree, you know, whatever it is that we routinely did as children and then disappeared as we matured and went through the process that you might call adulteration, becoming
Yeah.
an adult. And so this is just about regaining our common sense.
How beautiful is that?
Common sense, you mentioned something about intuition.
Mhm.
Intuition, whether it's coming from the rods of the eyes or many other aspects, which I'm sure it is inseparable from our survival.
Right.
It is what guides a species at the perfect time and in the perfect moment to make sure it survives.
Yeah.
It's not a thought, it's an absolute knowing at the
Mhm.
speed of light that moves the deer to all of a sudden run at unimaginable speeds that it
Mhm.
could never do if it was moving its own legs.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, intuition for me is like the spokes on a wheel that all comes into a hub.
Mhm.
And that hub, which is common to all those intuitive strands, is what we call our common sense. It's
Yes.
common to everything,
Mhm.
and that's how everything is aware of everything all the time. And these are just things that we've forgotten about, but we know by heart on some level, and we just need to be reminded and probably can't be reminded enough.
Right. I think intuition at the biological level of any body is instinct.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely, without question.
Yeah. So does that cover all your books?
That covers all the books other than the one that I'm writing now, which is a memoir. But I will just share that in that book I share experiences that I have never shared before, um, which were very instrumental in what guided me in different directions and so on. And share, some of them are just little funny stories that tell the difference of the way things were and the way things are. I'll just share one cute little funny story and then we'll complete. I was 7 years old. We had just been in the United States a couple months. I was born in Havana, Cuba. My parents immigrated there in the 20s from what is now Ukraine, but at the time was Poland one day and Russia the next.
Mm.
And we're 2 months into the being in Miami, and this is before any Cubans. This was 1955, and my parents are contacted that we have to go to the American consulate somewhere in Miami. And so all of us go. And, I was a little kid. I had shorts on and little high top leather shoes and a little shirt. And a man comes out and greets my father, and they're talking about something. And all of a sudden, I feel something, and I look up, and the man looks down at me and he says, "Your name?" And I said, "Jacobo." Jacobo means Jacob. And he looks at me and he says, "Boy or girl?" And I look at him and I said, "Boy." And he says to me, "How do you know?" And I pull down my shorts.
Perfect.
And and the whole place starts laughing, cracking up, and the man reaches over to my father, takes his hand, and he said, "Welcome to America."
That's fantastic.
And what's so beautiful about it is both the innocence of a child and the point I was trying to make is this is the way I was welcomed to America.
Having to show what sex you were.
No, no,
See,
no. I was welcomed to America with laughter and joy, and then I thought about what happens with so many immigrants now,
yeah,
and I realized, oh, what happened to that beautiful simplicity
yeah,
of being asked a silly question, responding in a sillier way, uh, which was not silly. I mean, it was just like
honest.
it was honest, and so a lot of it is sharing a message
Yeah,
in many, many different ways, and I hope to complete that book within the next 4 or 5 months. And Yeah, and then I'm looking forward to speaking about one of my favorite lines was Gandhi, who had delivered a big talk to thousands of people in India. And when he finished, he got on the train, and the train started pulling away from the station. And he was waving to the people, and alongside of the train was running a journalist. And the journalist said, Mr. Gandhi, what's your message for the people?" And Gandhi looked at him and he said, "My life is my message."
yeah, beautiful.
So this book is about my life is my message.
That's
And
excellent.
and so yeah,
Thank you. What a great share. And we touched on a lot of really important concepts that people often don't think about or talk about, but I think are super important today because of what we described earlier as people being so trapped in the mind, they're losing connection to the wholeness of themselves and the beauty of each other. We've all seen what's happened since the pandemic started. And I think, you've really given us a lot of the medicine that helps heal these issues.
it's so important to discover how so much of life is on automatic. and
Yeah.
takes care of itself, because so much of our stress, which is of course the major factor in the cause or often the significant impact of what causes chronic illness.
Yeah.
And so we, we've all become successful at almost everything except life.
How's
Life
that for
is
a
the next
paradox?
frontier. Yeah.
Yeah. We came here to live and forgot to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I am so grateful for the time that we've had together,
Thank you.
and
Me
for
too.
your very generous invitation and offer to engage in this delicious conversation.
Yes, thank you.
And like a kid that's just had the fun of his life, I say, can we do it again?
Well, I was going to say to you, we probably should do this again because we only got to 2 of the 16 questions I outlined for us.
You know,
That means we got 8 more podcasts to do.
yeah, we're gonna have to have a minefield of just getting to the questions, which I'm very happy to do. You just have to say when, and I'll be happy to jump on with you.
I'll get Penny to set it up because right now we're booked like, I don't know, 3 months in advance for
Good. This is
podcasts. So
great.
it'll be perfect. We'll book it now and then we'll get right back to where we left off.
You got it. You got it. Paul, have a wondrous day. And I called Penny this morning before we got on because I know how important it is for those of us that have the pleasure to share in this way to have these impeccable wizards in the
Yep.
background taking care of this technological universe we live in so that we can breathe easily. So I wanted to thank her in advance, which I did this morning, but thank her in closing also.
I will. She was very touched. She came in. She goes, I just got a call from Jacob Lieberman, and nobody's ever called me to say thank you for all the help in advance. Or, she was just quite, happily surprised. So thank you for extending so much generosity and connection to her. It really touched her deeply.
I'm so glad that I was guided to do that because, yeah, it was just so obvious to me. I looked at all her beautiful emails and she said, well, I sent you this very long email. And, I said to her, an engineer years ago said to me, the devil's in the details. And I said, no, God is in the details. And I said, impeccability is such a beautiful art. So I so appreciate the care
Yeah.
that she takes in making sure that everything you need to know is right there in front of you.
Yes. And before we go, what websites or anything else would you like to share?
Well, I only have one website. It's jacoblieberman.org,
Great.
O-R-G.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a website designed to sell you things. It's
Mm.
more of a information kind of website. There's not much that I offer that people may be interested in, but there are kits where they can learn how to use color in the way that I described. And I mentor like yourself, a small number of individuals who resonate with these kinds of things and feel it would be valuable for their life. And so I feel joy filled to develop wonderful friendships with those people.
Great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate everything you've shared. And before we go, I'll just say thank you to my sponsors for all the amazing products you make. Thank you to all of you for anything you buy from the sponsors. That money goes to responsible farmers and helps rehabilitate the soil, supports the farmers, supports you with organic nutrition and the best products I can get my hands on. And we all love and support each other that way. Thank you,
Beautiful.
Jacob, for all your love and sharing all the wisdom you have. I can't wait to have you back. And thanks to all of you guys for, embodying everything you learn in the podcast and being the change the world needs now by just living and loving more fully, which is the dream of the podcast, is to share that so we can all practice together. And I love you guys. Thank you, Jacob. And I can't wait to share something exciting with you next week. Aho, Great Spirit. It is done. It is done. It is done. See you next time.
I love you.
Aho.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, Dr. Jacob Israel Liberman. Visit Jacob's website at jacoblieberman.org to find out more about his services and consulting opportunities. Connect with him on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Jacob Lieberman. All Jacob's books, including his latest, Luminous Life, How the Science of Light Unlocks the Art of Living, are available on Amazon.com. If you are looking for a community where you can share ideas and ask questions about topics discussed in this podcast, then check out Paul's Spirit Gym program and community. Memberships start at less than $8 a month, and you get access to exclusive members-only opportunities from Paul's guests, live Q&A sessions with Paul and his guests, access to the podcast members forum within the Spirit Gym community, where you can interact with other passionate listeners, and the chance to purchase exclusive Spirit Gym merchandise. You can subscribe today by going to paulchek.com/podcast, or explore the higher levels of membership at myspiritgym.com. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.